Jess, I'm going to just talk like this the entire time. This is my new face. What do you think?
Good Lord.
Little peakish.
What are we talking about today?
I don't know, Jess. What are we talking about today?
It's been a year, Doug. It's been a year.
It has. But before we get to there, Jess, I was so disappointed this weekend.
Why?
So, you know how big of a Succession fan I am.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Right. So,
I do.
Jesse Armstrong had his new movie premiere.
Yeah.
Mountainhead. Steve Carell starring in it.
Steve Carell. Yes.
Carell, sorry. Yeah, so Mountainhead, Steve Carell starring. Like, how bad can a Jesse Armstrong written and directed Steve Carell starring? How bad can it be? Right?
Apparently pretty bad.
Isn't that what you're thinking when you go into
it? Yeah.
This bachelor weekend, my wife was out of town, so it's like, okay, you know what? I'm gonna sit back, chill. I'm gonna watch Mountainhead, and on Max, soon to be HBO Max. It released at midnight, so I was able to watch it during the day. Like I didn't have to wait till 8:00 at night when it premiered on HBO.
Yep.
I'm like, if nothing else, there's going to be some classic lines. Well, let me tell you, the answer to the question of how bad can it be? Really bad.
Yeah, according to you, really bad. I'm not going to watch it, I don't think.
What do you mean, according to me?
According to you, yeah. You're the review I've gotten so far of the movie. So according to you.
I mean, my credibility
fair
is I mean, like it's like who else?
Yep.
Yeah, so it was bad. It was in some ways it was worse than bad because it was just boring.
Yeah.
Like there was no other than it's like, look, if I want to watch the world come to an end because of social media, I've got a front row seat.
Maybe that's the problem.
But it was like there was no Succession had I don't know.
I think the thing about Succession is you had the family dynamic aspect, and does being able to run a show translate to being able to make a good movie? Like that is a question.
So I don't doubt that Jesse Armstrong can run a good movie.
Mm-hmm.
I think it reminded like some of what I read about it afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
So apparently it got done. It got conceived of, written, produced in less than a year.
Well, yeah, because Succession ended a year ago, Doug.
It's only been a year. Succession's only been a year.
I'm pretty sure it's a year ago. Yeah.
Yeah, it's about that. That. But, I mean, he could have started it before. Like, it reminded me of Tom Clancy. So Tom Clancy used to write.
Oh, no, I know. Yeah.
And then he became this uber best-selling author. And so he got to write whatever he wanted to write, which basically meant his books got longer and longer. Now, this wasn't long. I mean, it felt really long.
Right. Well, you didn't finish the movie.
I did not.
So.
I did not finish it. Apparently, I miss where like there's a murder plot or something, which is just kind of like, okay, let's like if I want to watch baseball, I want to see a curveball that's just like completely out of left field. Yeah, it was. Yep. So it was, I thought I was all teed up. I was literally teed up. I had my notebook out to write down great quotes so I could reference the quotes on the. Okay, I'm kidding. I didn't have a notebook out, but I was ready to reference quotes on this episode.
But alas, no.
The closest quote, and I heard it going into it, was the guy who plays the Uber, the Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk-ish type person. They come out on, they ride their snowmobiles out, and they get to the place, and the guy says, "This place is so beautiful, you could fuck it."
Wow.
That basically is the movie in a nutshell. So there, you can now say you've seen the movie.
Okay, great, awesome. I don't have to waste my time. That's great.
So Jeff, go on. Sorry.
No, I was going to say Kara Swisher must feel vindicated. I will say about HBO going back.
You talked it up.
What's that? No, I'm talking about HBO going back to Max, going back to HBO.
Oh, that's more
what I'm referring to.
I think vindicated. Who just I don't understand.
That was the dumbest decision they ever made. Like as a 90s baby. I guess 80s baby, 90s child. It's not TV, it's HBO. You're going to remove the one thing that we all know you for? Sorry. That's just my...
That's like, it's like letting the younger brother... So the younger brother bought the older brother.
Yeah.
and then he got to name it because he bought it, so he's not going to use that name. That's really how I felt. But the thing that no one's talking about that makes even less sense to me is literally a month or less ago, they rebranded. They rebranded Max.
Right.
They went to a black background, which, you know, and I don't get lost in that whole, like, whatever you want to do, who cares? But why would you rebrand
and then change the
and
name?
then a month later announce a new name? Well, you know what the Who say? Meet the new boss, same as the old boss. Meet the new name, same as the old name.
Exactly.
Now, is Cinemax still part of HBO?
No, I don't think so. Maybe. I don't know. I can't say.
HBO Cinemax.
Right.
HBO Cinemax. But there was a movie on Cinemax that's not available on Max.
So I guess not. I don't know if they're separate.
So these are the things that, Jess, I just don't know. But Jess, what are we talking about today?
The 1 year anniversary of the book. Speaking of 1 year anniversaries.
Yeah, you were talking. That's why I lost track. You know, most people don't remember when Succession ended.
The only reason I know that is because of a TV podcast that I listened to brought it up. That's the only reason that I remember.
Well, most people, because, you know, the ending of Succession was overwhelmed by the release of the Revenue Acceleration Framework.
100%, obviously.
So
it's
hard to. I mean, a year ago, the Revenue Acceleration Framework comes to mind.
Yep, with it being the 1 year anniversary of the book release.
1 year anniversary when we record this, but that's close. We're close enough for horseshoes.
Correct. I thought it would be a good time to revisit and reflect on some of the parts of the book, some things we've learned over the last year since it being published.
You know what? It's an even better time for?
What?
Buying the book. Available at your local digital book retailer. Or you can buy it direct from us.
Yep.
But you'd pay more. I would make more and you would pay more because you'd have to cover the postage and handling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or else if I covered the postage and handling, I would make less. And it would take longer because I'd have to. Anyway, sorry. Go on. I'm Amazon.
Yeah.
The revenue.
My thought on the core premise of the book is really getting more juice for the squeeze. I wanted to ask you, is that
why? Because so it's fascinating. We're going to be coming out with the audio version in a few months. Mm-hmm. I probably need to time these things better in the future. So I just finished the recording. So I literally just read the book over the last couple of months, and read it out loud. And I noticed, like, how many times do I use the term juice for the squeeze?
So I've worked with you for 9 years, Doug. I can tell you use it a lot.
Yeah, but like you get a full, like it's a concentrated dose.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what, isn't that what revenue operations is about?
It is.
Getting more juice for the squeeze?
Yeah.
I think there's aspects of two things, like where do you squeeze harder? Mm-hmm. Where do you squeeze less? And where do you not squeeze?
Yeah.
I mean, we spend a lot of time squeezing and the squeeze gets in the way of the juice.
Yep.
So yeah, I would say that, you know, the purpose of the book is I mean, it's the story of my life, Jess. How can I be a little bit lazier than the next guy and get more done?
It's your goal in life to be lazy.
Strategically lazy. That's what I call it.
Yeah. So there's a couple of key concepts I want to dig into, but before we go there, what's the biggest surprise you've had over the past year? We've taken on more complex clients. We've taken on some unique clients, at least for us. What's the biggest surprise that you've had as we've kind of grown that client base?
The biggest surprise is we've grown the client base, or the biggest surprise related to the book?
Let's start with client base, and then I want to hear biggest surprise related to the book.
Well, that's interesting. I think the biggest surprise is the more things change, the more they say. I mean, actually, probably for both, the more things change, the more they stay the same. You know, we've you know, it's hard. It's hard for me to think about this because the book's been out for a year, but the book's been done for almost 2 years.
Right.
And so really that journey on climate. I mean, so there's this aspect of, and I talk about it in the book, where you feel like, you know, oh, the larger company, they must have their act together. They've got these things figured out. Just how much Wizard of Ozdry we live in a marketing bubble.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone out there, and as narrative design took hold, the world is changing. What you did yesterday won't work. If you don't change, imminent doom, etc. And the fascinating thing is, as I move further away from my mic so no one can hear me, part one. So the official start of the book, Jack Welch, CEO of GE that led the company during their high growth days in the 80s and 90s, once famously said, if the rate of change on the outside exceeds the rate of change on the inside, the end is near. And so we live in this marketing bubble where everyone is telling that story in some fashion. And so everything feels like existential risk.
Yeah.
I think the power of inertia is something that I've become more familiar with. And I mean, you and I joke around sometimes, not to insult our customers, our clients, but sometimes when we look at what they're doing and we're like, oh my God, how do they, this is a $1.4 billion company. How are they running? Like if we were like, we couldn't make that work. And there's an aspect of the momentum of being in business has you in business. And so there's this aspect of the world is changing greatly. Yes, things move slowly until they culminate in big consolidation points.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's true on the upside and the downside. And so the biggest change is just how much, not biggest change, biggest surprise is just how much the problems of business are the problems of business. We continue to operate in multiple verticals, and there aren't, for all the change in the world, there aren't a whole lot of new problems. And it comes down to, I forget who told me this. He said, life, business has always been about two things, content and distribution. I think the thing that makes AI interesting is AI is a little bit content, a little bit distribution.
Yep.
So there's definitely things that are happening, but it's still, the core principles. And it's also, fascinating how, everything's a trade-off.
We were just talking about that this morning. So true. I
could have written this book yesterday, and some of your questions, I'm going to have disappointing answers because it's still so on point. It was written to I wrote it so that it wouldn't be time bound, but
right.
Just how much it's still on point was fascinating. There was a piece of me that was a little bit nervous that I was going to read it and there were going to be, clumps of the book where it's like, I wouldn't say that if I were to write that today. And there was very little of that.
Yep.
There were other things that were very painful about reading my book aloud.
I heard about all of them. So I want to talk about a couple of key concepts. So I want to start with friction tax. First of all, can you talk a little bit about friction tax for those who haven't read the book? And if you haven't, please go to Amazon.com.
You'll see. So the friction tax is the tax you pay for misalignment. The tax you pay for being in your own way. So how do you get out of your own way? So much of revenue operations and eliminating friction is how do we get out of our own way? How do we align our vectors? How do we truly, I hate to use the term because it's so overused that it's become just insanely trite, but how do you create, truly synergy so that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts? And how often, we talk about wanting to get to the place where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. I got to tell you, if businesses could get to the place where the whole was equal to the sum of their parts, we'd be in a different world. Most businesses are significant, and that's the cost of complexity. So that's the other aspect about friction tax is just the cost of complexity.
Yep.
Complexity wields a cost, and what is that tax?
Mm-hmm.
Now it's a myth. There's only two things guaranteed in life, right? You know what those two things are, don't you?
Death and taxes.
Death and taxes, and one of those taxes, if you run a business, is friction. If you're involved in business or in any organization, is you're going to pay a friction tax. So there's no thing as not paying a friction tax. The question is how much of a tax are you paying for just getting things to work together?
Yeah.
Would you say that's a good explanation of?
Yeah.
Friction?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. So on that note, do you have a good example of a client that we've had who has that we've seen reduce their friction tax?
Yeah, in introducing a development function, so like we have a client that in this is true for every client, but they were managing, they're a full funnel, full cycle sales organization, and the challenge when you look at full funnel, full cycle sales organizations is there's two distinct motions to a sale for the salesperson. Forget the role of marketing, but
Right.
just and that is the development motion and the selling motion, right? And the thing that's interesting about it, actually, I'm listening to a book right now, Activator Advantage, or the Activator's Advantage. It's a conversation about business development. It's a book about business development for professional services firms. It's research based on that. So just how much the development process is different than the sales process, and we tend to think of those as the same. So development has a different mindset. There's different skills, different capabilities between that. And then further within the sales process, there's often two very different types of sales that are involved. There's a complex sale, right? You're dealing typically with larger opportunities. More people are involved. You've got to develop needs. You've got to compete to win. And then there's a transactional opportunity, simpler. So I'm actually calling it complex and simpler, smaller transactions that need to be streamlined. Or it could be larger transactions, but companies that already have relationship with you, it's yours to lose. Don't screw it up. It's pretty straightforward, et cetera. And the difficulty is most people manage that all through one motion. They manage it through one pipeline. And so what ends up happening is we oversell simple opportunities. We undersell complex opportunities. We don't maximize our productive capacity because how humans work, the nature of you can't just shift from being in a development mindset into a sales mindset, back to a developer mindset. You can't do that in 1 hour. I can't go back and forth between those, right? There's so breaking apart those motions, and in some cases even building dedicated teams. We've had some people that have started to build dedicated teams to support that. Re-looking at, okay, what is our sales motion for larger strategic opportunities? How is that motion going to be different for smaller or more transactional opportunities? Those are all examples. And by the way, changing your metrics.
Yep.
Right. The metrics are going to be different. Your throughput's going to be different. Breaking apart what is the profitability. I was talking with somebody yesterday, and they've got a new offering. They're reasonably priced, but they're not big ticket. They're more medium ticket. And one of the things we were talking about was, how can you build we don't want to lower our price, so how do we increase the value? And we started talking about things where salespeople would provide assessments and we'd build more upfront. And one of the things I pointed out was I said we need to be careful because we could build this real robust sales motion that creates lots and lots of value, and it costs you $15,000 to generate, or actually costs you $50,000 to generate a $30,000 customer, right? That doesn't. Right. So managing those things are all examples of how we get the friction. And by the way, in their example, they have some sales that are in the hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yep.
Even approaching $1 million. Their typical sale is more in the low 100 to tens of thousands of dollars. Here again, kind of having one motion selling everybody the same is an example of that friction tax, breaking that apart and having a more robust beginning to develop. By the way, selling to an organization where I'm making $1 million sale has a very different mindset than selling to an organization where it's a $50,000 sale. That same, the person who's going to excel at the $50,000 sale isn't necessarily going to excel at the $1 million sale. And by the way, even the person that could excel at either of those sales will very rarely excel at both of those sales.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
And again, empathy and understanding the customer are so important, and mindset towards the money conversation and all those things. And what does that mean? All of those things really come into being, core examples. And this is talking about directly in the sales process. Those are places that we've had, and we're seeing the impact for it. We're seeing greater throughput by breaking apart the development pipeline from the sales pipeline, better insights into what the sales process needs to be, how to optimize the sales process, and so forth. That would be an example of how we've helped some of our clients reduce the friction tax.
Cool. That example you gave is an excellent segue, and we didn't even plan this. So the next key concept I want to talk about is frameworks versus tactics. You kind of just laid out the framework for how we approach sales process. So can you talk about the importance of framework, using a framework versus tactic?
This was a fascinating question, because I don't have a ready answer on it. It's a good question. Like, okay, what's the difference between framework and tactics? Frameworks are how you think about something, the order of operations. Tactics are what you do. So framework should inform. I mean, everyone has a framework. It's our viewpoint on how the world works. The question is, I mean, a framework is a heuristic. It's something that is generally true. It's not always true. It's not all. I mean, there are always exceptions. It's one of the places where what a framework does is a framework brings in constraints, and the initial reaction to a constraint is to push back.
Right.
And so one of the places that you push back is you say, well, that's not true. I had this one time where, and if you can't scale outliers.
Yeah.
You can't build a business. You can't build an enterprise business, a business that has true enterprise value on outliers. Can you? I mean, a boutique consultancy can build on outliers because every interaction is unique or different.
Right.
Your true customer intimacy. So I don't want to say you can't build a business, but you can't scale that business. And by the way that large consultancies that are in the bespoke consultancy business is scale is the consultant is in the bespoke business, but the consultancy is in the business of building consultants.
Right.
And so they're not, managing outliers. They're not, right. And that's where you get into the practice setup. And I don't want to, so, it's kind of, I talk in the book about the difference between process and methodology, and I think the same conversation between frameworks and tactics come in. What's the difference? The process is the value chain. The process is what do we do? The methodology is how do we do it? Everybody has a framework, right? We wake up in the morning and we have a MO of doing what we do. That is our framework for how we interpret and manage decisions. The question is that framework conscious? Is everyone working off of the same framework? And even when you build out a framework, I mean, one of the reasons that I love frameworks is frameworks should be able to be displayed on a single page in a picture, right? The difference between, there's the old phrase that a picture says 1,000 words. I don't think the power of a picture is that a single picture tells 1,000 words. I think that's true.
Yep.
But I think it tells 1,000 words all at one time. There's a synchronicity to the 1,000 words that are said. A picture shows you the relationships and the interrelationships and everything else. The thing that's interesting about words is words are linear. There's a first, second, third. Even if they're all happening at the same time, the order that you list something, we still, there's an aspect for how we process it. So even though a framework should be displayed as a picture, and a picture we're all able to see at the same time, we see the whole, right? We know this, like, why do we do video? Why do we like to introduce new ideas and processes through video? The reason is if we start to walk through it with you, you start asking questions, on slide 1,
yep,
which already deviates from the plan. Whereas if we say, okay, watch the video, at least you've been exposed to the whole thing before we go back to the beginning. And that's what a framework does, is it gives you the whole. before you start thinking about what do you do?
Yeah. So it's interesting because you talked about frameworks, the constraints, and I do want to talk about where people get stuck between framework and execution, but on the video thing. So it is something we will frequently get pushback on because people aren't used to it and they want to have a conversation with a person. And so I think there is a little bit of, because it's new, and also we're now asking that, like, we're kind of putting the onus on them to watch the video. So now they're having to do something, and I think there is a tendency to feel like, well, we're sending them a video, so we're doing that and quote unquote not paying attention to them, for lack of a better descriptor. So you've got all those things going on. However, when we do it, and by the way, that pushback's why it's easy to deviate from our framework, because it would be really easy to say, you know what, I'll just meet with you. That's cool. We'll just do it as a meeting. That said, when we follow the framework and we do it right, the outcome is 10 times better. The feedback we get's really good. So I think that's the piece, like, where it truly is, this is a constraint and I don't like it as the receiver of it. And it's really easy to say, well, I'll just deviate from. So is that an example of where people get stuck between framework and execution, or are there other things going on as well?
I think the place where it gets stuck is, I mean, you remember when we made the revenue acceleration framework, right? I mean, first off, it was years in variations. Do you remember what was before the customer? I'm sorry. Do you remember what was before the revenue acceleration framework?
I believe it was the deals framework.
Before the deals framework. So the deals framework is a subset. So deals framework is the execution framework.
Right, but didn't that come first?
It did come first.
Okay, I'm not crazy.
What before that we used to talk about, and it became, in many ways, it became revenue acceleration framework.
I don't recall.
Customer acquisition platform.
Okay, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Remember Little Houses?
I remember. So I knew it was Little Houses. I wasn't going to say Little Houses. I couldn't remember what it was called.
Inside joke, everybody. Not worth explaining to you. Right. So the customer acquisition platform became the revenue acceleration framework.
Yeah.
Right. And a large part of what was happening there was we were trying to explain to somebody, like, the impetus of the revenue acceleration framework was why is revenue operations important?
Mm-hmm.
Now, do you remember that originally the revenue acceleration framework was a pyramid, not an inverse pyramid?
Yes. Yep.
Right? Why did we switch it to an inverse pyramid?
So it's a funnel.
Nope. Because what is the job of revenue operations? The job of revenue operations is to solve problems upstream, not downstream.
Right.
Well, we had revenue operations in was at the bottom.
Right.
The foundation, right? Well, all of those pieces in conversation, and by the way, I don't know if you remember, we used to have execution and performance were next to each other instead of underneath each. Like, all those things were variations and iterations of the framework, all to make sense of how do we take like, what is the role of strategy? How does strategy translate into execution? How does execution feed back into like, answering all those questions is hard.
Yeah.
And putting it on paper in a way that says, okay, here's what this is. What are the pieces of this puzzle? It's so much easier in every moment to just go with the general, well, we're all talking the same thing. It's, let's jump in to do it. Right. Whereas what the revenue accelerate now, if you think about what the payoff of the revenue acceleration framework in terms of how we think about things, the order of operations, like, for us, we think about it. We don't even think about it anymore. Yeah. That's the power of the framework. But getting to that point to make those decisions and to deal with, okay, is that an exception or is that something that makes this belief false or false enough? Those are all very hard decisions to make. And it's a lot easier to operate. It feels easier. It's easier in the initial phases to operate without constraints. Now, once the constraints are in place, it frees up creativity and everything else, and the payoff comes later. I mean, so establishing that framework and building this, okay, this is what we believe, this is how we believe, and then teaching it and teaching it and teaching it. That that's hard to do. It's hard. It's hard to go back to first principles. And so I think that's, it's easier just to jump in. Okay, here's this. What do we have to do? And like that, that's just where we naturally fall as people. And that's why frameworks are so important, is because the intuitive way that we fall isn't what's going to pay off the greatest for us. If it were, then no one would have to do anything that wasn't obvious to them. We would just be intuitive and everything we did would work.
All right. I want to switch gears a little bit and I want to talk about AI. To your point, you finished the book basically 2 years ago, published a year ago. AI has since blown up. We know this because I was asked by my father, do I know what ChatGPT is? So it's clearly
Do you?
made its way to everyone. Have I ever heard of ChatGPT and have I ever used it? It was the question. My response to him was, what's that?
Do you know what it is? Because sometimes I wonder. Sorry.
My response to him was, do you know what I do?
Was his response, no, I have no clue.
Exactly. Yes, that's how the conversation.
I thought you talked to Doug about the 1973 Cincinnati Reds.
That's what he thinks I do, basically. He knows I do a podcast because he sees it on LinkedIn. All right. So AI has exploded since the publish of the book, for sure. The pace has changed. Everything's increasing. Everything's kind of evolving faster. So given that, does that change your thoughts on, you don't buy technology, you hire it? Let me start there. I think I know the answer to the question, but
I think if anything, I double down on it.
Okay.
I think it's even more important to view things through the lens of hiring it. What is the problem that you're trying to solve? What's the job to be done here? Because I mean, AI has changed radically. Think of our clients. Has their world radically changed?
No.
There's the promise. There's the FOMO.
Yep.
Right, and that's like. I mean, I had this thought about when I was on LinkedIn the other day. I mean, like I have found myself to be. Like LinkedIn's been, I think, net bad for me. It's charged up my my introvertism because I always feel under attack. Like I find myself meet somebody new and it's like, okay, well, what's the angle?
Yeah, I feel the same way.
We're in this marketing bubble, right? We live in this marketing echo chamber. I don't know if this is what everyone, like, I don't know if this is like in everybody else's experience, right? LinkedIn used to be great because it exposed you to this broad set of thinking and whatnot. And now, like, I had this, someone was listening to the book, Activator's Advantage, and they were talking about, the role of LinkedIn and how LinkedIn broadens the network. And I'm like, everything I see on LinkedIn is all the same.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that like, yes, there's been radical change, and yes, the rate of change is increasing, but there's an element of separating the signal through the noise. And so I think it's easy to jump on board. And, the danger of AI is you get the output without the effort. You get the answer without the learning. And there are places where that can be extraordinarily powerful.
Yeah.
But if you don't have the learning, then you don't understand why you're doing what you're doing. Right. Yep. And so when things change, are you like, it makes you more, like, it can definitely make you more efficient. Does it make you more resilient?
Yeah.
So if you were to ignore it, that would be worse still.
Well, that kind of goes to my next point. So how do you keep a disciplined approach, but still allow experimentation and not just hinder the improvements that AI can enable? Like, how do you manage that?
So I've increased my use of AI because I allowed for experimentation, and where I start seeing positive things and where they impact and where they come in. I do think that the role of strategy becomes more important than ever, right? What is that guiding policy? What is the diagnosis of the problem? What are the guiding actions? What's the rationale for what you're doing? Because it becomes easier and easier. It's never been easier to start a business. And in some ways, you could make the argument it's never been easier to run a business, but it's also never been harder to scale. Like, again, there's a resilience to scale. Scaling is more than just growing. And so I think that that strategy is so important to providing the guidance for the decision making that allows for that experimentation, and where does this make sense? And again, it is not ignore AI, it's hire AI, don't buy it. Right? What is its job? What are we doing it? What's the job to be done? What's the real problem that we're trying to solve? How do we know if we're making progress? I think there's this aspect where everyone's afraid, if I don't jump on board right now, I'm going to be left behind. And I don't think we're there yet. I think we're still in the early phase of this. As a matter of fact, I had a conversation with my brother about this. He lives in this space even more than I do. And so I said to him, where is generative AI on the hype cycle? And his response was actually really insightful, because he said, that's a really hard question, because in a lot of ways, depending upon who you're talking to, it's over the entire hype cycle. There's aspects of generative AI. Like if you're a big ticket tort law firm, generative AI is exceedingly powerful. It's having tremendous impacts on your efficiency. Whereas there are other places where they're still promising Skittles and rainbows, and it's not really there.
Yep.
And again, that's also, I think, where the framework comes in. Where do we apply it?
All right, I want to talk a little bit about the revenue acceleration framework in action. You brought up an example where framework was implemented. When we think about the components of the framework, economic model, go-to-market strategy, sales model, messaging. So for a company that's trying to get started, like, which of these components has the biggest impact let's just say out of the gate?
I think the biggest impact, and this is all part of the strategy part, I think the biggest impact is messaging. You are your message. So get that down. But I think you need to have clarity around what your economic model is as well, or you're going to run into problems.
Okay.
Because it's your natural inclination is to do more. I mean, I was talking to a company, their average sale is $3,000. And they have a robust sales process. And I'm like, you can't have a robust sales process if your average sale is $3,000.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, if you're doing that early because that's what you have to do to get to a point, and here's where that point of scale is, I could see that argument. But that better be a part of your strategy. How are you measuring and tracking towards that?
And then any companies that you've seen achieve more juice for the squeeze, and what did they do to make that happen?
Well, I mean, what we're talking about, what I talked about earlier, we're seeing greater throughput, greater revenue per salesperson. I think the other place where the friction tax comes in is it lowers your cost of operations. Your underlying cost structure becomes much more controllable.
So I don't think we're going to get through all the reflection questions. Do you want to do most of those as a part two?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, so one last question here, and then I think we'll do a part two where we dig into the book a little bit more of a reflection. But did RevOps become the buzzword you warned against in the book?
Yeah, it got there, not so much with a bang, but with a whimper. Revenue operations, and again, it's hard for me to answer this completely because we live in an echo chamber, as I've mentioned a few times here. So I'm wearing Just Say No to Shitty RevOps. Do you remember when we first wore this shirt?
I do. Inbound. I don't remember what year, but inbound.
Inbound 2 years.
Oh, okay, yeah, Shitty RevOps. Okay, yeah.
Because do you remember where we wore this shirt to?
Did we wear it to the fancy dinner?
We wore it to the bank dinner for right. And you remember, they couldn't even pronounce RevOps.
Right. Yeah.
So a couple months ago, I was in Boston, and I was doing that dinner again, and they were asking me about revenue operations and RevOps.
Okay.
RevOps has become this ubiquitous term.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean anything.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's the danger of what I was talking about.
Yep. So we'll have a part two. Like I said, I want to dig into some more reflection on the book.
Best-selling revenue acceleration framework is worthy of a part two.
Yes, it is. If you haven't read it, go get it. It's great. The biggest takeaway from today for me is the more things change, the more they stay the same. The concepts definitely still apply, and I look forward to kind of hearing some of your thoughts on the book now that we're a year out from publication in part two.
My takeaway here is something I hadn't thought about, but the importance of understanding and having a clear framework to guide your tactics is key to saying no to shitty RevOps.
Till next time.